Okay, folks, welcome to the beginning lecture of our social media, social networking section of the semester. And I'm just going to jump right into it. So we're going to start out by looking at this slide that you probably remember seeing in my classes before. So this is looking at changes in culture over the course of human history. So we're starting out, looking at this slide. You see the hunters and gatherers. Most of human history has been hunting and gathering. And, then we move into agricultural societies, industrial societies. And what we're going to focus on starting out in this section of the semester is the importance of the information age, computers, and we're going to get into more modern technology, not so much the bioeconomy, but certainly looking at that Web 2.0 with social networking and digital identity, okay? So before we get into that, we want to consider, traditionally as we think about sociology, that in my sociology classes, I like to focus on social institutions and groups and organizations and how those impact the individual from the micro level down. And then, of course, we spend a lot of time on thinking about the micro level with personal and interpersonal interactions and how that affects identity, how we think about ourselves, and how that helps us to link in society at large. How those interactions connect us with one another to one another through groups, media, social institutions, health, education, government, the economy and work, family, religion. And, so we've spent a lot of time in this semester, around these terms and ideas. And, we think about the importance of groups, and we've gotten really more focused on group processes. Of course, that's a fundamental part of the sociological social psychology. We talk about socialization and the importance of primary groups and secondary groups, the importance of significant others, and those relationships that we have with one another, not just relationships that are more one-to-one or familial and kinship types of relationships, but even the importance of connection and relationships in organizations. How do those relationships help us to become more organized and productive in society, okay? All right, so, and again, so, the social structure and personality perspective in sociological social psychology looks at that connection between social structures and individuals. And this, we've done a lot of this semester in class, looking also at group processes, and then again, that micro level symbolic interaction approach of how do we interact with one another, and how does that help us to better understand the reality that we live in, okay? That micro up to the macro approach. And that's going to take us to now considering more modern society, okay? So to give you an idea about where we're beginning with, we're talking about the information age, where that is going to be more the computer technology, but we're going to focus more on going into the internet age and thinking about the move from Web 1.0 to Web 2.0, okay? And that's what much of this lecture is going to focus on, is that transition from 1.0 to 2.0, all right? And what we mean by that is a move from a static web interface to something that is more dynamic, okay? And I've got a series of videos I'm going to show you that really highlights this transition from Web 1.0 to Web 2.0. Okay, so we're going to look at the last 25 years or so. And part of the questions that arise out of this is, what is real? Do we have a real world and then a virtual world? And, during this time transition, a lot of people saw things that way. Okay, Now, fast forward to where we are right now in 2020, the virtual connections that we have are serving to keep our real connections in check. This is a very interesting kind of flip-flop, right, in society. What influence do virtual communication and virtual connection and virtual relationships, how is that helping us to keep our identity in place, keep our society in place? Whether it's through, keeping work in place or keeping our practicing of religion in place or keeping our health in place. Virtual health is becoming a more valuable tool to use right now during the coronavirus epidemic. So, and then just to kind of give you a heads up, what we're going to be looking at in the next lecture is the importance of mobile devices in this Web 2.0, okay? And that's really going to take us to the end of the semester. All right? So a couple things here that we're going to look at. First thing we want to walk you through is just a quick look at the timeline of social media, kind of positioning my video a little bit better. But I'm going to walk you through a few things. So again, we're going to be looking at, around the late 1990s up until, 2010 or so, starting out. And just to give you an idea of the kinds of things that we're talking about, AOL Instant Messenger is released, Yahoo Messenger is released, MSN Messenger, and you all may not have heard of some of these things because they're defunct now. They've gone away. So largely been replaced by current, social networking applications through the mobile phone. Friendster, I remember participating in that. Of course, here is Skype. There's Facebook, Flickr, and then it gets really ramped up in the early 2000s. Reddit, Twitter, Facebook goes through changes, Pinterest, Instagram, and then so on and so forth, okay? All right, so let's go back to looking at our presentation here, and we're going to look at a couple of videos, okay? And so the first one that we want to look at is going to be this video by Michael Wesch. Now, what I'm going to point out about this is that it came out in 2007. This is really a fantastic video to capture that transition from Web 1.0 into Web 2.0. Think of Web 1.0 as where we're content consumers. Web 1.0, the internet at Web 1.0 is, select group of people know how to use the internet to put information on the internet, and then we as consumers just digest, we consume that information. Web 2.0, the fundamental difference here is that now we're talking about individuals being able to create the internet. It's more democratized, right? And so that is what this video highlights, and I want to go on and pull this up and start this. Okay, so just real quick. So what Wesch is talking about is, prior to Web 2.0, information was really simplified. I mean, I could write a book and have it printed, and once that book is printed, it's done. Or I could write something on a piece of paper, and then it's done. And I may be able to make a collage out of it. I may be able to cut it out and make something on the poster board or that sort of thing, but I can't manipulate information very much, right? And Web 2.0 brings in something completely different, right? And so again, instead of being from content consumers, we're now content creators. And that's continues to be what Wesch is highlighting here in this video. So, to kind of bring things in perspective here a little bit more, notice the title of this video is "The Machine is Us, is Using Us." So what he's starting to illustrate in the video at this point is what we put into the machine becomes who we are. Of course, you can really take this one step further. Again, this is 2007, 13 years ago. Fast forward now to 2020, how much of who we are is our social applications, our social networking, our online behavior? That's a reflection of who we are. This is back in 2007. Just starting to capture this point in time in our culture of where people can make the machine what they want it to be, make the internet what they want it to be, right? Of course, there's platforms behind the internet and operating systems, but in terms of the information of the text, the audio, the video, he's going to get to that in just a moment, becomes a reflection of who we are. The machine is using us. The machine is us, right? So continuing on. All right, notice that Mr. Wesch is a cultural anthropologist. Of course, that's certainly a closely related field of sociology. So, okay, let's now move back into the next video. So the next video I want to show you is 3 years later. Okay, it's called Did You Know 4.0, and let me just pull this up and we'll get to it. Now, this video also became to be a bit of a cultural phenomenon. It originally came out in fall 2009. You can see that there. And remember, so this is about 10, 11 years ago. And there was a lot of disruption going on in terms of information and Web 2.0 and what does all this mean? And, this is capturing a major cultural shift in our society about people accessing information and uploading information and just society changing, this notion of virtual reality and physical reality. These are where those questions reside around this time period. So let's jump into this. Let me press play. So something I'll point out, all of these data listed there are old, right? And so, we're well beyond these numbers. But this time period was capturing, what impact does this have? And of course, this is talking about media. And this is the beginning of social media really fundamentally changing the way that we access information, fundamentally changing books, this notion of books, and the notion of print media in general, radio even, right? So a move from mass media to social media. So again, this is capturing a point in time. So these data are old, and I just want to draw that to your attention. Something I want to show you. Let me go back in this video. Even some of the graphics and the images that they're using are old. That's a BlackBerry. Of course, that's not really around much anymore. Of course, laptops are, but desktops are kind of a thing of the past. But okay, continuing on. BlackBerry again. Of course, this means nothing anymore. This is nothing. These are all old data. Just real quickly, this is the first campaign that Obama ran in 2008. I believe that's correct. And, that campaign, really did become a defining point in political history about how to run campaigns using social media. And, of course, you think about how this presidential election in 2020 is going to play out on social media. As a matter of fact, we believe, there's a lot of evidence that the last election was drastically impacted by foreign influence through social media. So remarkable how things have just changed so rapidly in, a 10-year period of time here. So let's go back to the video. I don't know how well you are familiar with the impact of social media networking on we're going to come back to that. The impact of social media tools on overthrowing some governments, right? And that's what that was highlighting about the use of Twitter in organizing people for political protest in Iran. This became major in Saudi Arabia that ended up toppling their regime there. That's more recent. The dates kind of escape me on that. Maybe 2014, 15 maybe. But I wanted to stop the video right here. Now this is 2009. And look at what it says there. The mobile device will be the world's primary connection tool to the internet in 2020. We're going to look at some data on that in the next lecture, okay? Now, this is predicting it back in 2009, and of course that has occurred. It did happen prior to 2020, and we'll get to that data a little bit later. So let's finish this up. All right, so there's another video. So let's go back here and we're going to do one more video before we wrap up this lecture, and it's on cognitive surplus. It's the very last video you see there, Clay Shirky. And this is become a really important. Clay Shirky is a media specialist, the impact of media on society. And his work around cognitive surplus, again, is one of those hallmarks in the study of the impact of social media, social networking, Web 2.0 on society. So you're going to have an assignment on this, on defining cognitive surplus, okay? So that assignment will appear after this lecture video. it'll be expected that you do a little bit more work on that assignment than just writing that up in your lecture notes, okay? So let's get to this. Should sound better.
The story starts in Kenya in December of 2007 when there was a disputed presidential election. And in the immediate aftermath of that election, there was an outbreak of ethnic violence. And there was a lawyer in Nairobi, Oriakola, who some of you may know from her TED Talk, who began blogging about it on her site, Kenyan Pundit. And shortly after the election and the outbreak of violence, the government suddenly imposed a significant media blackout. And so weblogs went from being commentary as part of the media landscape to being a critical part of the media landscape in trying to understand where the violence was. And Akola solicited from her commenters more information about what was going on. And the comments began pouring in, and Akola would collate them, she would post them, and she quickly said, it's too much. I could do this all day, every day, and I can't keep up. There is more information about what's going on in Kenya right now than any one person could manage. If only there was a way to automate this. And two programmers who read her blog held their hands up and said, we could do that. And in 72 hours, they launched Ushahidi. Ushahidi, the name means witness or testimony in Swahili, is a very simple way of taking reports from the field, whether it's from the web or critically via mobile phones and SMS, aggregating it and putting it on a map. That's all it is, but that's all that's needed, because what it does is it takes the tacit information available to the whole population. Everybody knows where the violence is, but no one person knows what everyone knows. And it takes that tacit information and it aggregates it and it maps it and it makes it public. And that maneuver, called crisis mapping, was kicked off in Kenya in January of 2008. And enough.
So again, Shirky is talking about the importance of individuals providing information that can be collated, that can be organized via the web and web applications, and then how do those web applications benefit the population as a whole. Case in point, something similar to this might be how we're tracking the coronavirus around the world. Okay, now, that's not individuals uploading the information, but what you're seeing is people using the web to gather all that information and share it back out with society. Okay, now then, but we're going to get to focusing on the importance of individuals providing information and this new tool that they have in Web 2.0, including mobile devices now, and how do they use mobile devices, and how do they use their time with these opportunities to share information and to connect with other people via SMS, text messaging, and of course now via social media and social networking tools in a very robust scale, right? Again, this video goes back 10 years ago, prior to things like, Twitch, Google Plus, Snapchat, Instagram. Those were since 2010, right? And there's more apps and those kinds of things that you could see there popping up on the screen. So, all right, going back to the video then.
People looked at it and found it valuable enough that the programmers who created Ushahidi decided they were going to make it open source and turn it into a platform. It's since been deployed in Mexico to track electoral fraud. It's been deployed in Washington, D.C. to track snow cleanup, and it's been used most famously in Haiti in the aftermath of the earthquake. And when you look at the map, now posted on the Ushahidi front page, you can see that the number of deployments in Ushahidi has gone worldwide. Right? This went from a single idea and a single implementation in East Africa in the beginning of 2008 to a global deployment in less than 3 years. Now, what Akola did would not have been possible without digital technology. What Akola did would not have been possible without human generosity. And the interesting moment now, the number of environments where the social design challenge relies on both of those things being true. That is the resource that I'm talking about. I call it cognitive surplus, and it represents the ability of the world's population to volunteer and to contribute and collaborate on large, sometimes global projects. Cognitive surplus is made up of two things. The first, obviously, is the world's free time and talents. The world has over 1 trillion hours a year of free time to commit to shared projects. Now, that free time existed in the 20th century, but we didn't get Ushahidi in the 20th century. That's the second half of cognitive surplus. The media landscape in the 20th century was very good at helping people consume, and we got, as a result, very good at consuming. But now that we've been given media tools, the internet, mobile phones, that let us do more than consume, what we're seeing is that people weren't couch potatoes because we liked to be. We were couch potatoes because that was the only opportunity given to us. We still like to consume, of course, but it turns out we also like to create and we like to share. And it's those two things together, right? Ancient human motivation and the modern tools to allow that motivation to be joined up in large-scale efforts that are the new design resource. And using cognitive surplus, we're starting to see truly incredible experiments in scientific, literary, artistic, political efforts, designing. We're also getting, of course, a lot of lolcats. Right? Lolcats are cute pictures of cats made cuter with the addition of cute captions, and they are also part of the abundant media landscape we're getting now. This is one of the participatory models we see coming out along.
So we call those memes, right? All right, so the lolcats might precede some of you, but this is the early memes on the internet, okay? So I'm going to try to be clear on this on your assignment about cognitive surplus. But he's talking about, back in 2010, how do we use this extra time to participate in large-scale efforts? But I'm also going to have you consider, how do individuals use their extra time to create cultural products? And what do you create? Memes, TikTok videos, snap pictures with filters or what have you, right? So, okay, get back to the video.
With you, Shirky. Right. Now let us stipulate, as the lawyers say, that lolcats are the stupidest possible creative act. Right? There's others there are other candidates, of course, but lolcats will do as a general case. Right? But here's the thing: the stupidest possible creative act is still a creative act. Right? Someone who has done something like this, however mediocre and throwaway, right, has tried something, has put something forward in public. And once they've done it, they can do it again, and they can work on getting it better. Right? There is a spectrum between mediocre work and good work, and as anybody who's worked as an artist or a creator knows, it's a spectrum you're constantly struggling to get on top of. The gap is between doing anything and doing nothing. Right? And someone who makes a lolcat has already crossed over that gap. Now, it's tempting to want to get the Ushahidis without the lolcats, right? To get the serious stuff without the throwaway stuff. But media abundance never works that way. Freedom to experiment means freedom to experiment with anything. Even with the sacred printing press, we got erotic novels 150 years before we got scientific journals, right? So rather than focus right now, so before I talk about what is, I think, the critical difference between lolcats and Ushahidi, I want to talk about their shared source. And that source is design for generosity, right? It is one of the curiosities of our historical era that even as cognitive surplus is becoming a resource we can design around, social sciences are also starting to explain how important our intrinsic motivations are to us, how much we do things because we like to do them rather than because our boss told them to do them or because we're being paid to do them.
Okay, I'm going to move through this part of his presentation. To highlight the very end of this. Let's see.
And that there was no residue of guilt or social concern that the parents owed the teachers. And so the parents quite sensibly said, 10 shekels to pick my kid up late. What could be bad? Yeah. Actors. And in that the explanation of human behavior that we inherited in the 20th century was that we are all rational, self-maximizing actors. And in that explanation, right, the daycare center that had no contract should have been operating without any constraints. But that's not right. They were operating with social constraints rather than contractual ones. And critically, the social constraints created a culture that was more generous than the contractual constraints did. So Nisi and Ristaccini run this experiment for a dozen weeks, run the fine for a dozen weeks. And then they say, okay, that's it, all done, fine. And then a really interesting thing happens. Nothing changes, right? The culture that got broken by the fine stayed broken when the fine was removed. Not only are economic motivations and intrinsic motivations so incompatible, that incompatibility can persist over long periods. So the trick, right, in designing these kinds of situations is to understand where you're relying on the economic part of the bargain, as with the parents paying the teachers, and when you're relying on the social part of the bargain, when you're really designing for generosity. And this brings me back to the lolcats and to Ushahidi. This is, I think, the range that matters. Both of these rely on cognitive surplus. Both of these design for the assumption that people like to create and we want to share. Here is the critical difference between these, right? Lolcats is communal value. It's value created by the participants for each other. Communal value on the networks we have, right, is everywhere. Every time you see a large aggregate of shared publicly available data, whether it's photos on Flickr or videos on YouTube or whatever. This is good. I like lolcats as much as the next guy, maybe a little more even. But this is also a largely solved problem. I have a hard time envisioning a future in which someone is saying, where, oh, where can I find a picture of a cute cat? Right? Ushahidi, by contrast, is civic value. It's value created by the participants but enjoyed by society as a whole. The goals set out by Ushahidi are not just to make life better for the participants, but to make life better for everyone in the society in which Ushahidi is operating. And that kind of civic value is not just a side effect of opening up to human motivation. It really is going to be a side effect of what we collectively make of these kinds of efforts. There are 1 trillion hours a year of participatory value up for grabs. That will be true year in and year out. The number of people who are going to be able to participate in these kinds of projects is going to grow. Right? And we can see that organizations designed around a culture of generosity can achieve incredible effects without an enormous amount of contractual overhead, a very different model than our default model for large-scale group action in the 20th century. What's going to make the difference here, right, is what Dean Kamen said, the inventor and entrepreneur. Kamen said, free cultures get what they celebrate. Right? We've got a choice before us. Right? We've got this 1 trillion hours a year. We can use it to crack each other up, and we're going to do that. That we get for free. But we can also celebrate and support and reward the people trying to use cognitive surplus to create civic value. And to the degree we're going to do that, to the degree that we're able to do that, we'll be able to change society. Thank you very much.
All right. So, interesting video, and that's going to take us pretty close to the end of this lecture. Let's see, the last thing that I would like to bring you back to, again, is, let me pull this up for you here, is to kind of where we started, right? So a consideration of this right here. Now, this is society as we knew it, pre-Web 1.0. Now, where does Web 2.0 reside on society? How has that been overlaid? And I think this is really going to be evident as we start thinking about the impact of the coronavirus. Right now, so much of that you see right there, all of that, or maybe I should say, how do I say it? That stuff down there, right, is being mediated through virtual technology, through video chat, through text, through FaceTime, through Snap, through Instagram, through social media and social networking services. So we'll come back to that a little bit later, but that's going to wrap up this lecture. And thank you so much for your sticking around for this longer lectures that we've had. And stay safe. See you soon. Peace.